Professor Indika Karunatilaka. He is the head of the Department of Medical Education and Professor in Medical Education at the Faculty of Medicine, University of Colombo. And he is the head of World Health Organization Collaboration Center for Medical Education at the Faculty of Medicine, University of Colombo. And he is also the president of the College of Medical Education. And he will be speaking to you about the landscape of medical education in Sri Lanka, the past, present, and the future.
Good morning to all of you. And at the very outset, I would like to thank the organizing committee of this session for initiating this very important activity and the seminar. And as professionals, I believe that it's our responsibility to build up an evidence-based platform and the conceptual framework and make our voice heard, because this is a very crucial and important time period related to medical education. During this time period, this presentation, I will be discussing the landscape of medical education in Sri Lanka and be touching upon the past, present, and the future, so that we will have a clear understanding about what medical education is and what is its role in higher education, and as professionals, what are our responsibilities and the duties and obligations. To start with, I will be discussing a little bit about the history as well. So, history of medical education and the current global scenario, and how medical education has evolved in Sri Lanka, the present situation, and the future. Those are the areas that I will be discussing during this very brief presentation. The history of medical education, or the Western medical education, has the same history like history of Western medicine. Hippocrates is considered as a father of Western medicine, who practiced in 4th century before Christ, can be considered as the father of medical education as well. In this category, it depicts how Hippocrates has taught his disciples and basically given a lot of prominence to clinical teaching. Later, slowly, the medical education has developed during the medieval time period in Europe. And this picture shows, during that time period also, the medical education in these countries that developed alongside, centered along patient care. Because even during that time period, it was understood that clinical training is a cornerstone for medical education. This was very well illustrated by one of the giants in medical education and medicine, Professor William Osler. So he very aptly mentioned that he who studies medicine without books sails an uncharted sea, but he who studies medicine without patients does not go to sea at all. So this again shows the importance of clinical training and patient care in medical education. So slowly the medical education has developed in Europe and has moved into the newly found United States as well. About just over 100 years ago, in United States, medical education has become a very profitable business. There are medical schools. Sometimes few people would get together and start a medical school. Like that, there were so many. Over 100 medical schools that were mushrooming in United States. The quality has gone down so much that the United States government in 2010 has to appoint a committee to look into the quality of medical education in United States and Canada. Now education is called Abraham Flexner. The Flexner's report, today it remains one of the landmark publications in medical education. And after studying the medical education in United States, Abraham Flexner came out with a really hard-hitting, drastic report, which described the status of medical education in USA during that time period. So he mentioned that overproduction of ill-trained men due to the existence of very large number of commercial schools. So he really criticized the profit-motivated medical schools in the United States. And after Plexner's report, more than 50% of the medical schools that were existed during that time period had to be closed because their standards were so good. So we are talking about the quality and standards of medical education. Why? Because medical education or the medicine is the only field where the decisions regarding life and death are taken on a continuous and regular basis and at times without anyone else's supervision. Therefore, medical education is a very complex and a rigorous and continuous process. And to make sure that the standards are maintained in this rigorous process, the investment that you have to make, include or provide is very high, especially in terms of providing clinical training. Because of this very high investment in medical education, the profit and standard doesn't go together. This again could be illustrated very well using the global situation. We believe that top medical schools globally are private, and many refer to schools such as Harvard, Yale or Princeton. However, they are actually misnomers. The prestigious Ivy League medical schools in the United States are historical developments. They were started during the historical time period of the United States, started by philanthropists who gave away all their properties to start the medical schools, and those medical schools don't have private owners. There are no public-private partnerships. They don't look for profit, and their motivation is the prestige and the quality. And they are governed by trust. Therefore, calling top US medical schools as private is actually a misnomer, because there are no private owners. There are no people who take the profits home. Similarly, many believe that many international medical schools like the Monash or New South Wales, are they private? Not really. In Australia, there are only 2 private medical schools, and regarding them also there are a lot of controversies. Top Australian medical schools like Monash and New South Wales, all of them are actually government funded. Government funded, fee levy, but they are not private. Because even in those countries, the amount that you have to spend to maintain the quality and standard is so high. And only the government sector is capable of making that kind of investment on a non-profit motivated basis. The top UK medical schools like Oxford or Cambridge, they are all public and the government sector. It was only very recently, in 2015, that the private medical schools was established and got the GMC, General Medical Council approval. To highlight in some other way, Margaret Thatcher, who can be considered as the godmother of neoliberal economic policies, hasn't initiated private medical education during her time period in UK. It was only in 2015. That too after a lot of regulations. The Milton Keynes Teaching Hospital, which became the teaching of the Buckingham Medical School in UK, took 15 years to develop into that standard, the required standard for a medical school. This shows how regulations and standards control the quality of medical education in those countries, because they have understood and realized that the quality matters when it comes to medical education. Even Singapore, again the epitome of medical, the commercialization and the liberalization in Asia, they don't have private medical schools. The National University of Singapore, the #1 medical school in Asia, is government funded public school. So this again highlights the global trends. What happened in nearby India? In 1990s, India, under a lot of political influences and manipulation, relaxed the rules and regulations related to private medical education. What happened then? There's mushrooming of public private medical schools all over India. Currently, the total number of medical schools in the country is close about 600. And some of the medical schools are just restricted to name course and a building. Some of those articles, the rampant fraud, admission issues, political interference, manipulations have plagued the medical education in India so much that Dr. Sujata, once the former Secretary of Health, mentioned that the commercialization of medical education in India is one of independent India's biggest mistakes. It has happened in UK also. In UK there are some profit-motivated medical schools, and the United Kingdom General Medical Council has banned it. They have given the GMC approval because the quality was so poor. Because of those quality issues and mushrooming of poor quality medical schools, in early 1990s, there was a global movement under World Health Organization to standardize the medical education and come out with a basic minimum criteria required to establish a medical school. This initiative was under the World Federation of Medical Education and WHO. And in 2001, the World Federation of Medical Education came out with guidelines in establishing minimum standards in medical education. And those guidelines covered 9 areas, including mission objectives, education program, student assessment, student entry, academic staff, education resources, program evaluation, governance, and continuous. And under each of those areas, the WFME has stipulated the standards, the minimum standards and the basic standards to be achieved. And recently also, the WFME has come out with criteria for establishment of new medical schools, because they mentioned that those guidelines should be there to avoid the establishment of unnecessary or low quality new medical schools. So this shows how globally, how much they are concerned, and the after effects or the undesirable effects of establishing substandard medical schools. In Sri Lanka, the medical education started about 140 years ago in 1870 with the establishment of the Colombo Medical School. And it was started within the Colombo General Hospital premises. That again shows the inseparable link between a medical school and a teaching hospital, the clinical training. With time, many new medical schools started in 1970s Peradeniya, then Trupuna, Sri Jayawardenapura. The Faculty of Medicine at University of California has historically important because initially it was the North Colombo Medical School. Again, there were a lot of controversies, and after that it was converted into the Faculty of Medicine, University of California. And at the moment there are 9 state medical faculties in Sri Lanka, and about 1,300 students are admitted each year to those medical schools. Now I am going to discuss the medical education in Sri Lanka's present situation in accordance with the human rights and higher education, and how this caters for the needs of the country and the health system, and how can we maintain the quality and the standards. If you go by the World Declarations in Higher Education, Article 3 highlights the equity of access. Equity of access to higher education. And Sri Lanka is also a signatory to this declaration, and we are morally and legally bound to be in line with this declaration. It mentions that the admission to higher education should be based on the merit, capacity, efforts, perseverance and devotion. And there should not be any discrimination related to race, gender, language, economic, cultural or social. So the basis should be merit and capacity. So what about merit? Do we have such a system in Sri Lanka? Contrary to several systems, what the worldwide research evidence shows is the advanced level system shows the best correlation with the medical school performance. There are very large level studies conducted in United Kingdom, meta-analysis conducted over 20 years. They have shown when it comes to the determining factors of medical school performance, the advanced level of the equivalent is the most important determining factor. Research evidence related to other methods such as vivas, supervisory letters, so on and so forth, has not come anywhere near this level of validity. So there is a body of research evidence to show that the system that we are following has a merit. And what's the current situation related to biology? In Sri Lanka, about 20,000 students get 3 S's in the biology stream. And about 7,000 out of them get into the university. What does this say? This says out of every third student who are passing the biology, one of them get the university access. And out of that, about 1,300 students are entering into medicine. What does this say? This means out of the 7,000 who get the university access, 1,300 enter medical. So out of the biology stream university, out of each 5th university student, 1 student is a medical student. Those ratios actually are higher than many other countries. The opportunity is much higher than many other countries. For example, in Sri Lanka, there are about 3,000 students who are getting 3 Bs and above. Out of that, 1,300 get the medical school admission, close upon 50%. And those who get the 3 years, almost 100% enter the medical school. But if you consider the UK situation, 3 years is the basic minimum criteria. 3 years is the basic minimum criteria at the A levels. Even if you get 3 years, there is no guarantee. That's the basic minimum criteria. In established schools like Cambridge or Oxford, sometimes even 1 out of 13 out of those who get 3 years will not get the admission. So, the opportunities, even though there is a lot of criticism, we have reasonable opportunities to enter into medical education within the government system of the country. So that's about the entry. Then what about the needs of the country, the health system? The Lancet report, which came after 100 years of the Texas report, highlighted that medical education in a country should be in line with the health system. What are the health system requirements? The medical education should provide that, and the medical education should be catering for the health system needs of the country. Again, WFME says the rationale for the new medical school should be based on the need for medical doctors in the relevant community and the country. Again, there is a huge criticism that there is a severe shortage of doctors in the country. I am sure Dr. Dilip will be going into more details about this aspect. But I will be showing one finding. The World Health Organization, after detailed studies, have identified Sri Lanka as not as a country with a critical shortage of doctors. Again, there may be questions about, okay, why do there are queues, lack of facilities, maldistribution. All these are actually health system issues. When it comes to number of doctors, for the doctor population ratios, our ratios are very much comparable. Again, Dr. Dilip will be going into those details. Then, what about the quality and standards? According to medical ordinance, the Sri Lanka Medical Council is the body in charge of maintaining the standards of medical education in country. Again, I am not going into details regarding this because Dr. Chandan Harpal will be going into details regarding this aspect. However, maintaining quality and standard is not a new thing. In 1887, Queen Victoria granted, through a royal charter, granted the rights to Colombo Medical School graduates to practice anywhere in the British Commonwealth. So even during that time period, there was the notion of the quality and standard. Even though when you mention that we don't have minimum standards, they have been there. The minimum standards were first gazetted in 2006 and 2007 and later in 2009. In 2009, it was actually under the leadership of Professor Lanka who initiated that we have to revise our minimum standard according to the World Federation of Medical Education guidelines. And here I would like to mention very humbly that she took the support of few of us in medical education in that time, myself, Dr. Govinda, Dr. Ashwini and few others, and she got us to get the first draft of minimum standards in 2009. And that was in line with World Federation of Medical Education. And later, those were ratified by a medical council's network meeting held in Colombo in 2010, and then there were 2 documents. However, unfortunately, none of the ministers of health from 2007 were able to get a parliamentary approval for the minimum standards. They have been gazetted, and they ended up just in a parliamentary committee. So, none of them were approved in Parliament because that was the duty of the ministers of health during those times. So again, it's very high. Even then, those regulations were in practice. The SLMC has come out with 2 documents based on the minimum standards in 2009, and those documents have been in practice since that time. So those regulations were under SLMC governance, and those regulations were applied to both overseas as well as Sri Lankan medical schools since 2011, since this publication was gazetted. So they have been in practice. They have been in practice like many, like the British Constitution, which was not document but in practice. Similarly, the minimum standards have been in practice since 2011. And the 2 main areas in minimum standards to me, one is entry criteria. Again, there is a saying that UGC stipulate 3 SS as entry criteria, which is actually wrong. Because if you really go into entry criteria for nursing and pharmacy, 1 C and 2 SS or is stipulated as a minimum grades, the UGC. So saying that for medicine, 3 SS is the minimum criteria is wrong. And another thing is, that is education wrong as well. Why? Because 3 SS or 4 SS could have been applicable about 40 years ago for medicine, not anymore. Because there is a phenomenon called grade inflation. As time goes on, the grades that the student obtain will go up due to many reasons. Because they are putting the exam technique and the new technologies coming in, familiar, so on and so forth. That is what we call grade inflation. Therefore, the minimum entry criteria for a particular cohort should be based on that cohort performance during that time. So 3 SS is not the performance for the students who are entering medical students nowadays. As this graph shows, actually this was shown to the Honorable Minister of Health as well. From 2010 you can see the grades that are obtained by the students are gradually on the increase. Now even in the underprivileged areas like Mulathila and University, the minimum grades have reached 3 Bs. That shows that we have to keep a high minimum entry criteria. 3 SS don't apply in. Another important requirement in minimum standard is we need teaching hospitals because the clinical training is the fundamental basis of medical education. All the government medical schools have teaching school complexes, over 1,000 bed capacity, and hundreds of thousands of patients are attending the outpatient, so that there's no shortage in clinical resources. Why we need that kind of clinical training material? Because otherwise the students will not be able to cover at least the minimum core cases. Even if we take, there are about minimum core clinical presentations about 20 for one major specialty. Even then, to cover that for a batch of 100 students, you need a hospital of at least 700 beds with 75% bed occupancy. Otherwise, we cannot simply cover the required amount of clinical material. That's not possible. So, that's another very essential important matter. Then regarding quality, what are the current developments in medical education? The medical education nowadays have moved into more student-centered, more problem-based, more integrated integration between basic science and clinical sciences, more community, more elective driven, and more planned systematic. This is what we call the Spicer's model in medical education. Many medical schools, state medical schools in Sri Lanka, they follow this Spicer's model, establishing more student-centered teaching learning methods and implementing more communication, ethics, professionalism-based courses. For example, if you look at this curriculum map of the Colombo Medical School, you can see the community and the behavioral streams are started as early as the first year. That is to show the importance of the community training, the public health training, prevention, and also to highlight and emphasize the importance of areas like communication, ethics, behavior, so on and so forth. And very early introduction to clinicals, because medical students come to the medical school to become doctors. So we have to expose them to clinical material as early as possible. So most of the medical schools, government sector medical schools, follow this Spicer's model to different extents. All the medical schools, they follow to different extents. For example, this picture of here, where they learn the basic sciences, anatomy, at the same time the clinical relevance and the clinical material are discussed. And if you compare this with, say, one of the Cytem course, you can see at the first year, the emphasis is on the languages and the history and the physics, biology and chemistry. Now this is a very outdated model that has gone out of practice about 50-60 years ago. The curricula has evolved over time. Now they very much follow the Spicer's model, the student-centered, integrated, community-based model. It was long ago that the model was based on initially the biology, chemistry and zoology, physics, and later moving into basic sciences, later moving into clinicals. That model doesn't apply anymore. Similarly, the need for clinical training and need for hospital-based training, all these aspects are very important. Community-based training in the Sri Lankan context is very important because all the health indicators that were achieved by the country, they were based on the public health prevention approaches. Therefore, our doctors should be having very good grounding in public health, community medicine, field approaches as well. So, some of the medical schools in state medical faculties, they go to faraway areas, for example, Colombo, Jawaharlal and many other faculties, they go into the fields in faraway areas, stay there and learn about the grassroots level public health interventions. So, it was a lack of those areas that has later led to the excellency decision that the science medical course is not up to the standard that is expected. So, what's the future? The future should be based on the current development of the medical education, the needs of the country, and the socio-economic and the political situation. The medical education is ever evolving. New techniques are coming in. And it has to be integrated with the health system needs. The need to have doctors be more professional, more communicative, more understanding of the patient requirements because the patients are changing. So all these requirements call for rapid development and more focus and improvement in the medical education in this country. And that calls for a continuous effort and a continuous activity. So that is what we are trying in medical education to improve the quality, improve and maintain the quality of medical education in Sri Lanka. Similarly, it should be in line with the health system changes. Nowadays, there is a lot of focus on establishing primary care centers because as a country, as I mentioned previously, Sri Lanka's achievements are based on the primary healthcare approaches. Therefore, our medical education should be in line and geared with the health system requirements of the country. How many doctors we need, what are their required competencies, what are their required qualities, so on and so forth, and what are the required numbers, and how can we produce it. And finally, socio-economic situation is changing, political situation is changing. The expectations of the middle class is very different from the expectations of the middle class during the time of NCMs. The requirements are changing, so we have to understand those feelings as well. and political situation is ever changing, and there are a lot of issues, maybe corruption, manipulation, influences, all these factors come in. So when you are thinking about medical education in the future, we have to consider all these factors together. And as professionals, it's our responsibility to be equipped with correct facts and make our voice heard, because we have a system which has been catering for the needs of the country, which has evolved over the years, and it has contributed to the health system success of the country. So therefore, as professionals, it is our responsibility to safeguard and improve this system for the benefits of the future.